Hi, I'm Shruti Rana. I'm a election board member. I'm the Democratic appointee and also currently the chair of the Monroe County Election Board.
I'm Hal Turner. I'm the Republican appointee to the Monroe County Election Board, and I'm also treasurer of Stonebelt Arc, and I know there's something else. Oh yeah, I'm on the re-precincting committee for the county council.
Well, for me, it was the chance to feel like I could really make a difference and be a part of the community and just a really meaningful form of public service. And in particular, I moved, after I moved to Indiana, my daughter was born here, so she's a native-born Hoosier. And I was just thinking that as we see, lots of things happening in the world around us and some rights being rolled back, that it was really important to me to try to work for a world where my daughter would have the same opportunities that I have. And I wanted her to have more rights and more opportunities than I have had, as well as the other children around her. And I thought, if I can go into public service and actively work towards these goals, that's the best thing I can do for my daughter's future as well as the future of our community.
I started getting politically involved in high school and college. This was during the Vietnam War era, and so I was involved in some anti-war movements, and that got me interested in politics. I went out in the working world for a little while, but after I retired, I decided I would act on it. So I ran for county council here in Bloomington, and I lost in the primary. So then I refiled and ran for county commissioner because didn't need to be a primary. Almost won, but not, that doesn't count in politics. You either win or you lose. And most people in politics actually end up losing. So it's an occupational hazard, and you have to brush yourself off and decide what you're going to do next. So I let a couple of years go by. I worked with my party, and then I decided I wanted to serve again. So I talked to the party chair, and he offered me the opportunity to join the Board of Elections. And so I'm really glad I did. I've been on the board for a couple of years. It's a lot to learn. This is the code we have to work by. It's quite long, and it reads like the phone book. I've found it very, very interesting, though, and really motivating. As far as the Board of Elections is concerned, we get to deal with constituent problems, voter problems. We get to work with the Election Central staff and the election supervisor. We get to work with the Board of Commissioners. We get to work with pretty much everybody at some point. Elections cross a lot of lines in government. And so we have to, whenever we're putting on our election hat, have to make sure that the best interests of all the voters are being met.
Yeah, I would say the same, and what I would add is that we have the opportunity to meet a wonderful variety of people,
Yes.
right? People from all walks of life and all over the county are voting and want to vote or have issues that they want to see addressed, and it's a really nice opportunity to talk to people and find out what they're thinking, what they're out there voting for, and what problems they might have faced or challenges that they've faced voting that we can help them address.
Yeah, the excitement of an election is really palpable. You wake up tense and you get into the election office and you're working with volunteers, you're working with other officials, you're making instant decisions as a board. We are actually, we adjourn up to the election so that we can reassemble and make official decisions and then move on with the election. It's a very exciting time. I'm most proud of the fact that during the COVID election of 2020, I had the opportunity to be chair, and we had some real challenges. The governor was changing the rules basically on the fly, so we had to make good, quick decisions of how we were going to handle an election where people wanted to be apart, but they needed to come together. So it presented some interesting challenges. Instead of one early voting center, we ended up with 7. And these were mostly gymnasiums, so people could spread out a lot. And it really went smoothly. It went very well, even though the lines backed up a little bit sometimes. I think we served the people the best we possibly could under those circumstances. So that's what I'm proud of.
And I've been on the board for far less time. But one of the things that's been really meaningful for me is that, we're in at a particularly historic moment in time where voting access, we know it's a fundamental constitutional right to have the right to vote, but voter access is under threat and being challenged in so many different ways. And I think it's often, although it's such a fundamental constitutional right that we have in the United States, it's often hard to keep track of all the different laws and challenges and different things going on around the country, in our community, and in our state. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I think we've really raised awareness about the challenges that we face and will face coming into our next election. And I think it's really resonated with the people of Monroe County, and people are working really hard to make sure that we have the fairest and most secure and accessible elections that we could possibly have. And I think that's incredibly motivating to see people do that and thinking about that.
Very well. We invite them to our meetings and they invite us to theirs. Particularly the county council has been looking at increasing the space for voting because we had lines that were sometimes 2 hours long at Election Central. So we've been working with them to try to resolve that in the best possible way. And all these factors of voter participation and inhibition, if we move a voting location, are coming into play. We want to make sure everyone is enabled to vote and everyone is allowed to vote who wants to vote. And we took it to the point in the last election of going out with what's called a travel board. There were 50 people who were down either with COVID exposure, active COVID, or they were a family of people with active COVID. We took 50 ballots out to those people in the 4 days before the election and gave them a chance to vote either in their homes or even in their hospital rooms.
I think one of the things that's really important for the public to know is that we work very transparently with other government offices. It's all out in the public. Sometimes, there's small budget details and things like that that might not be the most exciting pieces of information, but everything that we do is out in the open and available for people to read and participate in. And the vast majority of our meetings also have opportunities for public engagement and public comment, as well as, the public is always welcome to sit in and listen and watch. And I really encourage people to do that because I think it's one of the best ways to become involved in your community, public service, and the issues that are facing your community. And I think it's just important to know how kind of transparently, collegially, and in such a welcoming way is how we try to operate with both with other government offices, but also with the public.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we share a common belief that we're doing this for the common good of all voters. And so there's no partisanship apparent at our meetings. We try to work as collegially as possible.
Definitely.
That's a great word.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We share these very common, not only common goals, but just very important goals that we also care so deeply about, ensuring access to the right to vote.
Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is working it within a tight budget and incredibly tight timelines. A good example is with COVID, everything is backed up. So everyone gets notified on very short term, up to as little as 1 week, to make changes in the election process based on the governor's health edicts. And it's really a challenge to figure out how we can do things efficiently and completely and still live up to this.
Yeah, I would add to that, I think, again, we're dealing with this fundamental constitutional right that is so important to people, but at the same time, the issues that we're looking at and the information out there is very complex. And so one of the challenges that we face is how to distill complex information into clear messages for the voting public, so people understand how something might impact them, what the stakes are, and how we might go forward. So for example, I think, people have very busy lives. They're out working, caring for their families, doing all sorts of different things. And it's our job to read the code for them, I think, and say, this is how things are changing. This is what might be updated. This is what you need to know about how this will impact your ability to vote. And it actually can be pretty challenging, I think, to attempt to distill something like that into,
Absolutely.
clear, concise information for the public. And so I hope that we're doing that. And I would say another challenge is it's actually much harder than I think people often think it is to build solidarity and consensus. Even if people have general shared goals, they might have different ideas for how to get there. They might be thinking about a number of competing concerns. And so I think sometimes to the public it looks like there might be a clear common goal and they're wondering why it takes a convoluted path to get there. And I think a lot of it is building trust, reaching out to different groups, reaching out to different people, and making sure that everyone is on the same page and understanding what is coming up and what is happening. And that's a very challenging but also very exciting and gratifying process to be out there meeting people, asking them what matters to them, trying to figure out what their concerns are and how we can best address them.
Yeah. We want to make sure that we never infringe on people's ability to vote, and that's why we sometimes have to go to extraordinary lengths. People are busy, people have multiple responsibilities other than voting. So if we have to close a precinct and move it somewhere else because that precinct was not compliant with the ADA, for example, we have to get the word out to voters. They've voted at that spot for 10 years, 20 years, and they're going to show up there on election day expecting to vote unless we can get the word to them. So we do postcards, we do emails, we do advertisement, we do radio spots, and we put signage up at all the old places telling them where the new place is, so that no one will show up somewhere and say, I don't know where I'm supposed to vote, I'm not going to vote. We don't want that to happen ever. I think it's election day. It sounds sadistic or masochistic, but I really do love the tension, the rush, the pressure to make things happen, and that tension of constantly getting reinforced that things are going okay, oops, there's a problem, we have to deal with that immediately, boom, boom, boom. It's really being on the firing line. So you're going to see that.
Yeah, I'm excited actually. I'm looking forward to it. I've been on the other side of voter protection, and now I'll have my chance to be,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that, or cross my fingers, we're going to hope for it to be as smooth as possible. But in my time on the board, I just think it's been so incredibly exciting to talk to all the different people who care about voting in Monroe County, and again, try and understand what is it that they're looking for, what are they thinking, and how can we help them, right? What's the best way that we can help them secure their right to vote and make it as accessible as possible? And there's so many different challenges that people face that are important for us to consider, and it's so interesting and important, I think, to, when someone lets you into a little piece of their lives and tells you, this is what the challenge is that I'm facing and this is what I need. I think that's an incredible honor that someone has shared that information, and then it's up to us to take that information and figure out how to make it happen, how to honor them back by helping them, access the vote or just meet the challenges that they have.
Yeah. Details. Making sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. When we unlock a precinct for voting, we want to make sure that everything is set. We want to make sure the machines are prepped. We want to make sure that all the volunteers are well trained, and we have great people to do that. We're really blessed. This is a fantastic town for public participation. So we get tremendous support from people. And without them, we wouldn't have elections. It's everyone's election, so they realize that, and they come out in droves to help.
Yeah, and I would say, in addition to the detail, there is conveying the detail and information to people. And sometimes that means telling 100 different people the same exact piece of information because they need to know. And so we do a lot of that, I think, just going over what we've decided or going over what we're doing or just going over the rules multiple times just to make sure that different groups of people have heard what we're doing or heard what is going on. Like you were talking about sending out postcards, reaching out to people in all these different ways. I think we need to be exhaustive in all of those, and sometimes it does take a lot of time and effort. Most of the time it takes a lot of time and effort.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot like producing a fantastic musical. Everyone has to know their part, everyone has to be well-trained and well-versed in their part, and then when the curtain goes up, you have to rely on people to follow through. We can always use more help. We need more public involvement. Right now, we do have a lot of terrific volunteers, but we need more young people to get involved. That's where we're probably thinnest on our volunteer base. We're trying to get more college-age people involved and more early working people, but that's a tough time because you're working. You're building families, you're buying homes, you're working overtime to try to make ends meet. And it's very tough, but we would like to see a broad interpretation of the workforce represented in our volunteer staff.
Yes, and I think I would add to that that what you see on election day or leading up to elections is just the tip of the iceberg, that actually the election board and all the wonderful staff, the poll workers, people are working year round and years in advance of elections in order to make, that kind of curtain performance that you just mentioned go off without a hitch. And so when we talk about volunteers, I think people should know that there's so many different parts of the process that people can be involved in, but that it takes so much coordination with so many different hands on deck that, again, we really value volunteers and support.
And these volunteers get paid.
Yes, so it's service, but paid service also, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then I would say the other thing is that I think living in the United States, we have the privilege often of taking the right to vote for granted. And so many of us have grown up with that privilege that we do take it for granted. And I really do want people to know that I do think some of the challenges that we're facing from so many different perspectives, some of them actually are unprecedented or things that, we haven't seen, in our lifetimes maybe or recently, depending on, and it's important for people to know that we need to act now to preserve the right to vote in the future, and we need to do everything we can, that we shouldn't be taking it for granted, that we should be working towards coming up with the most secure elections, focusing on ballot integrity, focusing on access to the polls, focusing on outreach and understanding that we have this right now and we've taken it for granted, and we don't want it to become a privilege that only some people have access to or that isn't widely available. And that's the type of thing that we must always be aware of, I think. Just no matter what time period we're living in or what challenges we face, I think it's always important to never take the right to vote for granted and to constantly be thinking about how to make our elections the best and safest and most secure that they can be.
Yeah.
I would say a number of things. I think we need to think beyond Election Day. I think, again, when people think about what the election board does, they're thinking about Election Day or leading up to it. But really, elections and casting your ballot are just one part of building your future, right? Building the future for your children, building the future for your community. And it's the key step in representative democracy. It's the key step in making your voices heard. It's the key step in just building a better future for everyone. And so I think that sometimes it's easy to say, well, I just cast a ballot, or maybe my preferred candidate lost, but I think just the act of participating in elections is so important to the functioning of our government, and so important to fully realizing this idea that we all have a voice, we all have a vote, and that is important no matter how the election turns out or who wins. What's also always fundamentally important is that we upheld the Constitution, that we all participated, and now we move forward together with whatever the results are.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that when we go into an election, we know that more than half the people in that election will lose. But we have a form of government where we understand that the voice of the people as a whole is the most important thing to come out of an election. So once the people speak, we accept it and we move on. But we want to make sure that they can speak loudly and clearly, and that's our job.